All right, welcome in everyone. My name is P.H. Irwin, Communications Coordinator here at SAANYS, and I welcome you to another SAANYS Pro Learning session. Today's Summer Specials webinar is titled Navigating the Special Education Landscape. As we begin, please remain muted, but feel free to use the chat room throughout for any questions, and our presenters will get to you. Also, please be aware that this session is being recorded. And with that, I will turn it over to Karen Bronson, SAANY's Director of Professional Learning.
Thanks so much, PH, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that your summers are all off to a good, fairly cool start. We're really looking forward to today's session. As some of you may know, for the last year and a half or 2 years, SAANYS has really focused on how we can support school leaders with the work that they do around special education. So we have really been very happy to offer a variety of series and workshops, conference events that zero in on different aspects of special education topics. Our initial goal was to support general education leaders who get into new leadership positions and they do not have any formal special education background themselves. They may have been math teachers or phys ed teachers or you name it. And, where do we start with all that? So how can we support that? So we're very proud of the work we've done around special education, and we will continue to do this because it's been very well received, and we really see it as something that is very beneficial to our members in terms of professional learning. So today, I am so happy to have Dr. Joyce Carr and Brett French with us. We are going to, today's kind of lens is looking for kind of that intersection of special education leadership and legal kinds of concerns. And to look at that today, we're really going to take an in-depth look at a couple of special education topics that do have significant legal implications, as well as, of course, a major impact on student well-being and success. And I know that Joyce, who's also a past president of SAANYS, longtime special education leader, and still doing a lot of that work that she can tell you about now, and Brett, who is one of our SAANYS attorneys, have worked together very closely for a long time leading up to this workshop when questions come to SAANYS around special education topics. So they are really kind of a dream team right there. And I'm really happy today to turn it over to them to start our workshop. I'd like to remind everyone that the session is being recorded. And I know you might be wondering if you will get a copy of the recording. So I will say yes, everyone who registered for the workshop will get a copy of the recording. And Joyce and Brett have also been kind enough to say that they will share the actual PowerPoint with registrants. So a couple of days, within a couple of days, you should receive an email from Christine Foglia here at SAANYS. And in that email, you will see the PowerPoint and you will see the recording. And with that, it is my great pleasure today to turn it over to Joyce and Brett.
Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to see you. I just want to go over today's meeting norms, just to give everybody an idea, because I know it's virtual and we haven't seen each other in a while in person. So the purpose of holding a virtual session is really for us to continue to network and build our relationships with each other, because I think it's really important and a keystone of SAANYS to really build that collegial team. So you have people that you can reach out to, people that you get to know that maybe are in positions like you. So if possible, start with your camera on just so we can see each other. In case we run into each other somewhere else, we know who's here. Because like I said, it's a really good opportunity for us to get to know each other and build our networks. Also try to remain focused and collaborative. I know it's summer and there's a million things going on. We do have an agenda for today's meeting that I'll share with you, but please don't hesitate to ask us questions. We're really here to answer your questions. And some of our topics are just really sentence starters. We're really here to answer what you want us to answer, but I also wanted to go over some information that I think is is really important, especially this time of the year. Be mindful of your mute status. If you're not speaking, if you could just mute yourself. And then last but not least, we will honor your time. We know that summer's precious and we want to be cognizant that you're taking time out of your day to spend with us. So we will be trying to end promptly at 11:30 so you guys can get going where you want to go. Okay, today's agenda. Well, we'll start with introductions a little in case you don't know Brett and I. Like Karen said, I recently retired. I was 35 years a special education teacher and a special education administrator. I was an assistant principal. I was an assistant supervisor for special education. And then I was a director of special education for a small city school for 20 plus years. Just recently retired, thought I was done, but you're never done, especially with special education, because there's really so much work to do. And I really like continuing the conversation and helping those behind that are still in the field. So and I went and got my doctorate in special education just in 2018. And I really focus on inclusive practices. And I've started my own inclusion solutions consultant. If so, we can talk more about that at the end. But I've been in special ed since 1989. So I'm in deep. Mr. French?
Yeah, hi. Good morning, everyone. My name's Brett French. I am an attorney here in the General Counsel's Department of SAANYS. I'm coming up on 4 years having been with SAANYS. I've been practicing law since 2015. In my role here at SAANYS, it's quite broad. We give, many of you may know, but we handle everything from collective bargaining negotiations to defensive representation in interrogations or 3020As to general advice to our membership. On the fly questions, emergencies come up, strategy discussions. So from a counsel perspective, we do much of it is litigation. Much of it's negotiations, and then there is this, broad range of counsel that we give. I've been fortunate to work with Joyce, as Karen mentioned, specifically in a 3020A that was rather lengthy and dealt with many topics in a special education department or running a special education department. I defer oftentimes to Joyce and her expertise. And I've said this before, and I'll always say it, is that our members in these fields will generally have a better understanding day to day how their district operates, what the information they are receiving is. Our goal here at SAANYS is to ensure that, from a counsel perspective, we are connecting you with industry leaders like Joyce. And we are strategizing through problems while also ensuring that you're getting the right advice from your district counsel.
So here we go. All right. So today's agenda topic, as you know, special education is so broad. We can go on and on forever. That's why I put part one, because I'm really hoping this is a series that we can continue, because there's so much information that should be shared. But I really, when Brett and I got together to talk about today's agenda, we really discussed what should administrators be thinking about right now in July and August. And I wanted to give you topics that you could think, oh my gosh, am I ready for when school opens? So hopefully this is information that you can, after today, you can do a little checklist and say, okay, yep, I'm on track to get things done that I need to get done. So we're going to talk about administrative responsibilities regarding special education, whether you're a director of special ed, whether you're a building administrator. We really tried to be broad. Because it's really important that we open this communication, and we'll talk about that more. But we're going to do IEP implementation. We're going to talk about BIPs and transportation, how we can support each other through CSE and CPSE, how the building and district office can support each other. Briefly, what an IESP is, because sometimes that's out in the wings and people don't really remember it or think about it until school starts. Staff hiring right now, I'm sure everybody's still really busy, and evaluations and how to support staff. Communication, management of resources, any updates on PD, research, and legal. And then we're going to end with 10 practices for success regarding special education services and programs. Like I said, if you have questions, please unmute, shout them out. This is really dialogue. We're here to answer your questions as we go through, or put it in the chat. And if we can't get it to it today, I'll certainly email and answer the best that we can. But we're really here for you guys. So let us know if we're not answering what you need us to answer. So we're going to start with IEP implementation, administrator responsibilities. These are what we're going to talk about under this part today. I won't read it to you. Obviously, you can read it, and we're going to go away because there's lots to talk about. So the first thing I think about when I'm in July, and really when you're in March, is schedules that meet IEP requirements. So as a building administrator or a district administrator, I wanted to get these things in your head so you can kind of have an answer for yourself and your district or your building, is who's responsible for scheduling services for students with IEPs. In my experience, it's been some people say, oh, it's a special ed teacher. They come in the summer and they do kids' schedules, and that's who does it. Other people say, oh, it's the guidance counselors. They get the IEPs and then they put the kids in the courses or get the services that they need. Some say it's the assistant principal. Really, it's the principal's obligation to make sure that the IEP is being implemented in their building. It's their oversight. So I understand that sometimes you defer and let other people have that responsibility, but as the building administrator, you really need to be checking to make sure that those IEP services are lined up. The other issue is sometimes we overservice kids and we put them in like a code talk class or a consultant class because they get testing accommodations and it's easier to put them in with a special ed teacher. I understand the logistics of that, but sometimes that means you're overservicing a kid. So then when you get to a CSE meeting and somebody says, oh, well, my son had code taught social studies last year, so it should be on his IEP, but it shouldn't have been on his IEP because he didn't need it and he just got into that section. So you need to think of those kind of questions. Are you putting kids in classes for convenience? That means they're actually getting overserviced on their IEP. So also when school starts, whoever's scheduling those students, and that's why, it's also a challenge about when schedules get done and locked down and put into whatever student database that you have. So then you can start layering that special ed piece in. If you're waiting to like the really last minute to get services done, then it's really hard to get services scheduled. Okay, can you unwrap over servicing? Terrence, tell me more. Where are you? Where's
Good
Terrence?
morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. Tell me more, Terrence.
I just found it interesting you mentioned over servicing a student, which at times has been my experience that students are being exposed to over servicing, but I want to kind of unwrap what that means for you as you said it.
Well, really, they're entitled to the services that are on their IEP. So if I have a student who is in an integrated ELA class, and that's the only service, they have a learning disability in reading, or the goal is going to be addressed in their, consultant integrated ELA class. But because he's in that class, he may be clumped with students that also have math or also have, usually it's ELA and social studies. They usually go hand in hand. But if you have a student who isn't in a code talk class and we put a student in a code talk class, because like I said, they could be clumped with that group, they travel with that group, they have testing accommodations, and you already have a special ed teacher in there, so that's kind of easier too. But then if you get to the CSE and you say they're only eligible for ELA, and the parents say, well, yeah, but they've been in, 3 code talk classes since 9th grade, you have to have that conversation. Well, that really isn't their service, but it also counts as the 12 kids that are in there, even if it's not on their IEP. If they're in that class with an IEP, it counts as the 12 students that can be in an integrated class. So sometimes, it's that appearance that that kid has that service and he or she doesn't. So I think it's really mindful, and parents and other teachers get that idea that that kid needs all that services and they don't. So I think you have to be really mindful that if they only get one, give them that service and then put them in the gen ed classes when they don't need that service. Because that we're also going to talk about resource allocation. And sometimes that sucks up a resource for you that you didn't have to have. Because then you're like, oh my gosh, I have all these sections of ELA co-taught class. Well, you really don't, because you have kids in there that really don't need it.
Thank you.
Did that answer it?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Okay, back to my thing. Here do I get back? I'll get back to here. Where's my slideshow? Where's my share? Where'd I go? Where'd I go? Okay, here we go. Share, 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 share. All right, so again, checking to make sure the IEPs are lined up with services, who's responsible to check those, make sure that the other thing is really making sure that if they have individual services, if they have group services, are the minutes being met? You really need to have somebody looking at IEPs, matching kids' services, making sure they are the same. And when you delegate that to other people, guidance counselors or school counselors or special ed case managers, sometimes convenience, biases, decisions may have played into some of that schedule piece, and they don't accurately reflect what the IEP says. Another thing you should be thinking about is who's responsible to check IEPs and schedules after CSC meetings are held, and in case there's a change to schedules. Make sure that that schedule change happens. So who's reading those minutes? Who in your building is letting somebody know if schedule changes have to happen? It's just processes and procedures you should be keeping in your head. And then transfer in students. This is always a challenge for staff. Who is receiving those? Who in your district is doing record request? Who is making sure that they're asking the right questions when they make the record request? Does the student have an IEP? Can you send all the evaluations? Is there any doctor scripts for Medicaid that needs to be received? Whoever's doing that record request should have a pretty detailed checklist about what they're asking the other district to receive. A lot of times, not a lot, enough times that I've dealt with people who've gotten themselves in hot water is because either an IEP has been received and nobody was notified about it, and it just gets put into a file folder and the student doesn't receive services, or the parent says my student doesn't have an IEP, or my student does have an IEP and they're not accurate. So it's really important that when whoever's doing that record request is asking the right questions, and when they receive the paperwork, where does that paperwork go? Who is deciding the emergency placement services and what paperwork is associated? So as a transfer in district, the receiving district, you have to implement the existing IEP as close as you can. So if you get a student who came in and they have integrated ELA on their IEP, but you're a district that doesn't offer that service, then you would put consultant ELA on that IEP if that's your continuum of services. But you need paperwork that says he had this, he's receiving this, and the parents agree and understand to that. So it's really important to document those services, and you have to keep it as close as the IEP comes in until your CSC meets and or you reevaluate that student. So emergency placement paperwork is very important, and it's really important that the building that receives it is explaining that to the district office or the CSE office or the special ed office, that you're really getting those records in a timely manner, because services can't be interrupted. You can't say this student moved in and it took me 2 weeks to get these services going because we didn't have room. This is a pitfall, and it's a logistic nightmare at times, but it's really important. Brett, do you have anything to add to that?
All right, I was looking into the questions right now. What was that, Joyce?
Do you have any questions about emergency placements? Record request? Because I know we've talked before about who's getting those records and who's asking the questions and who's letting the district office know that a special ed person moved in and making sure that paperwork's filled correctly.
Yeah, in a previous case we had where Director of Pupil Personnel Services, I think, was relying too heavily on secretarial staff to be conducting these investigations or making these requests. But ultimately, it's going to fall on the leadership as to whether or not the district receives those documents. And it's not going to be an excuse that necessarily the district that the student is coming from has not yet gotten you those records. The affirmative responsibility is on the receiving district to ensure that those documents are received and those records are received and processed. And I really don't think that it's going to be a defense for the individual or the district to, claim that there's been a delay. Is that what you're getting at, Joyce?
Yeah. And you have to have a process. You got to have paperwork. You have to have talked to the parents. There's a process that needs to be put in place. So whoever you are, whatever position you have, make sure you understand what the process is for record request and emergency placement paperwork. And if you don't have a process put in place, I'm more than happy to help. You get that established because it's really important and it'll save you a lot of grief in the end.
And
So Jody, go
every
ahead.
time you talk about process is that these processes really need to be documented too. We get into this situation of, we always hear, well, what's our practice? What's our past practice? That's the process we have. But if you're not documenting it and you're not taking, diarying different dates and diarying your notes as to what steps you took, that process, is basically non-existent. So it needs to be documented. And as Joyce said, Joyce can really help with these different types of checklists, if you will, that you can have. And it's not necessarily the most extensive of things. It can simply be a standard form that you're filling out a line as to the date you contacted, the date you expect to receive records back, follow-up requests, because each of those documented efforts will show a reasonable steps that were taken and that a process was followed.
Correct. Great. Jody, you said, speaking of 12 students, can I clarify if it's 12 students max or 50% of the class? That's a great question, and state has not really clarified that for us. It's 12 students with IEPs, but they'll also say best practices is less than 50% for smaller classes because otherwise you have weighted the classes. So I've always told my building principals or administrators that they should follow whatever is the smallest of it. So if it's 50% would give it more than half, then I would say you need to split that up in sections. But the regs say 12%. I don't believe the regs say 50% of the class. That's just best practice. And it'd be really hard to defend if you overweighted a class because then you really made a supplanted class for gen ed kids in a special ed classroom. So I don't think they've given us clear information on that. So just food for thought on this one is really making sure you understand your processes, that they're written down. Everybody understands where they are, and July is a really good time to work on this because if non-compliance for service delivery and IEP implementation, it can lead to corrective actions. You'll get put on a cap. You'll have to write this extensive plan. You have to progress monitor yourself. So it can also end up in compensatory services that you may have to make up for services that you didn't have started in a timely manner. You can lose federal funding. They can say, you know, we're putting some of your IDEA money over here on hold until you have trained and have the processes and procedures that you need and can submit it to state ed, or you could end up in legal actions. And New York State Ed also places districts under monitoring, which would require staff training and oversight. So just keep these in mind that, you know, if you get yourself in hot water, the consequences can be pretty extensively serious for the amount of work you're going to have to do to get yourself out of it. The next one is Chapter 408, and this is the state law that requires that each provider has a chance to have an electronic copy of the IEP or a written copy. And the reason I put this down is just to give you, again, you need to think, how is this going to be done? So anybody who's responsible for delivering that IEP has to have a chance to sit with somebody that explains the IEP to them, and they sign off that I have read the IEP, I understand what I need to do, and I had the chance to ask questions. So you need to have a process in place of who's that person and what form are they signing off and how are they acknowledging that they had the chance to do that. And that also includes your paraprofessionals. If a student has a BIP that needs required hall, like something in the hall needs to be, then the hall monitor needs to be able to look at it. Your bus drivers, if you have transportation and you have something on there that the bus driver needs to be aware of. So who is going to do that? What's the process? What form are you signing off that you keep copy that you did that? So again, just food for thought. Everybody has to do that. I've been in districts where they get a sub for like the first day of school, which is maddening to the whole world, but at least everybody can come down on their prep and ask questions. We've had people do that, you know, your PD days before school starts. We've done it so you could come in the summer and you get your caseload, and I'll pay you time to sit down and look through your IEPs. But how are you doing that and how are you documenting it? Make sure that the student's IEP remains confidential. That's another conversation you need to have with everybody. So just food for thought with this one.
So
Who
Joyce,
plans and go ahead.
are teaching assistants included in this?
If they are responsible to deliver any of it. So yeah, so if they're doing the testing accommodations or if they're reinforcing pre-teaching or reteaching. So yeah, anybody who has any responsibility of implementing any part of that IEP has to have this opportunity.
Now, what would be a best practice for who the individual is to actually sit with the teachers, the providers? Who do
I would
you recommend?
Well, I would say different buildings or different districts, depending on the sizes and who you have as resources. So most time it's the special education case manager that would do that, but there's also smaller districts where it's a school psychologist who could sit and do it, because whoever's responsible for it is the one who can interpret it and explain it. So you just can't have, you know, anybody waltz in and say, okay, read that over and let me know if you have questions. You need somebody that's read it, understands the implications, can answer questions meaningfully.
How do we navigate in those situations where we have, you know, maybe because of a collective bargaining agreement, you know, restricted time for those teachers or teaching assistants or drivers to actually be able to sit with them? When can we build this time in if their schedules are already blocked out?
That's exactly the food for thought. Each district handles it differently. Some get substitutes, some do it during the summer. Like I would pay, some districts pay their case manager for one day and that says we're going to be in the boardroom on this day for this kid, these kids, and you can come in and answer questions, and then they fill out a voucher and I pay you for walking in and sitting down with me. Some I do.
Yeah, do you recommend that that's why, you know, our summer PD days or PD days throughout the school year need to be utilized, you know, to have basically carved out time for this as well?
Yes. That's why I'm telling people now, because you really want to figure out when does that happen? Who's signing the form off? Where's the form kept? Because state ed can come in and say, let me see those forms. So
and ultimately, I mean, Joyce and I have dealt with this particularly, and you know, the buck is obviously going to stop with the the building principal and the director of special ed or pupil personnel services or special services if you have it. And ultimately, it's going to be a weak argument to say, well, yeah, we had this due process complaint, but the IEP, having not been followed or implemented correctly is not my fault as the supervisor. If you can't show that you gave opportunity for review, time for review, opportunity to ask questions, how that IEP should be implemented. So if that's not documented, it's a weak argument to say, really, even though the buck stops with me, it stops somewhere shorter in the chain because I did everything I could do, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. All right, BIPs, another favorite topic, which goes right in with your IEP implementation. I assume everybody knows a BIP is a behavioral intervention plan. I just wanted, as administrators, for you guys to be thinking, one, you should be reviewing who has BIPs before school starts. Everybody should know that, the assistant principal, whoever's doing discipline, your dean of students. You should have a list of who has BIPs so you understand when you're dealing with discipline that things had to happen. I wanted you to just remember August 2nd, 2023, SpEd prohibited corporal punishment, aversive interventions, prone restraints, and seclusion. So seclusion is timeout. And I know we still use it and you still can, but timeout and physical restraints are only allowed under strict conditions and with proper training. So timeout cannot be the answer on your BIP. Physical restraint cannot be, we'll put the kid in a restraint. They are for, circumstances that are extenuating. So that can't be just part of the plan. So you should be getting a list who has VIPs in your building. You should be reviewing them. So as an administrator, you understand what the requirements are for that student, how to interact with that student. But also as an administrator, you must know that all staff must receive annual training on your school policies regarding behavioral management. You have to have evidence-based positive strategies in the BIP. You have to have training in crisis prevention and de-escalation techniques. All staff, all staff. So what program does your district use for that training? Are you a TCI school? What do you use to de-escalate your students? But most importantly, as an administrator, who's keeping track that staff receive the training? Who's making sure the certifications are up to date? Who's making sure that staff are scheduled for retraining before their certifications lapse? Because if you're a TCI trained, it's a 4-day training. And within 1 year, you have to take a refresher to keep trained. So if you have staff that do that 4-day and then they lapse, you have to do 4 days again. So it's really important that you keep that schedule up to date. So you're only taking staff out a day instead of 4 days every year. Again, it's resource management. It's good time management because you want your staff in class. So who's keeping track of that? All right, Jody, let's see.
I'm
Unmute
sorry.
and tell me what you need.
I'm sorry. When you say all staff, do you literally mean every person, or do you mean everybody that's working with students with BIPs?
All staff need to get the training on the school policies. They need to understand what training is offered with the school. They need to know de-escalation techniques. So that's really broad for general ed. Everybody needs to know these are our school policies. This is where you find this information. This is our program in our district that we use. This is who we train, but it's everybody. And then those who get the training for, the TCI training, you can be more selective about who's going to be interacting with those kids, but everybody needs the training on the broad umbrella of your behavioral interventions in your district.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's your BIPs. And then again, Brett and I will pound this home every time. Documentation of what training occurred, what interventions you're using, who's doing the monitoring for all this, and it's required for compliance. People should be signing in that they attended these trainings on this date. This was the topic. Here's the agenda.
So I said there's a couple of questions, one from Melissa on this topic, which is
Okay.
um, it kind of looks like maybe a uniformity of training. So is there a recommendation as to a singular training or, options?
Well, I love that question because New York State only recognizes TCI training from Cornell as an appropriate train. It's a training that they reinforce or they will say is an appropriate training.
Mhm.
A lot of districts use a lot of different de-escalation, but the TCI training from Cornell is the only one that New York State has recommended as the training for staff. So I train the trainers in my district because I couldn't keep sending them far away. So I trained 4 people from Cornell. They go yearly to get certified. And then I pull staff as certifications come and what staff is working with what students in what settings. So all my special education teachers have to be TCI trained. All aides who either at a one-to-one aide that the student has a BIP or they're in a self-contained classroom, all administrators should have TCI training. And to be honest, I got a lot of pushback from unions about this because general ed teachers or teachers would say, I'm not putting my hands on kids. I'm not getting trained. And I said, well, this is during your workday and you don't have to leave the district. So you are attending the training. And I'm not asking you to put your hands on kids. I'm
Right,
asking you to be prepared for safety and it's really to protect them, but also to protect the district.
right, and just from like a risk perspective, I would say that having a uniform base training is one thing. It's if you have additional resources, I would say that that's fine, but you don't want to have the competing ideologies, right? You want to make sure everyone is it has a uniform base, right?
Yeah. And
I
it's
think
got to
that
be
might answer the
evidence-based
question.
and yeah, you do. And you want everybody using the same vocabulary for the
Right.
sake of the kids.
Right. But if there's additional resources offered,
Hmm.
right, I think that's fine. I don't think it would be the right situation where it's an either or. You want
Nope.
to make sure you have your uniform base training that everyone, if they are individuals that need to go through the TCI.
Well, especially because a BIP's behavioral intervention program is on an IEP, it's individualized. So
Right.
yes, everybody should have that same response when it
Right.
gets to that situation if restraint is needed, or if de-escalation is needed. But individually, Brett, you may react differently than I would to other sorts of interventions.
Right.
But this training is really the safety piece.
Yeah, there were two questions I think that were related to the sign off. I think probably I think that applied to the opportunity to review and sign off on the IEP.
Okay.
Um, I've seen, but Joyce, you can, recommend if there's a better practice. But if the situation is where those opportunities are coming up during PD, obviously you want to have that well spelled out in your information going out as to what the agenda is going to be, right? And then you have sign-in sheets, obviously, as Joyce mentioned, but identify that the opportunity was offered on that date, right? Now, whether there's an opportunity to also have that designated in clear track. Joyce, I don't know if you could speak to that.
A lot of districts are using that blanket statement in ClearTrack or IEP Direct that says when they log in that I'm reviewing the IEP and I understand to contact the case manager if I have questions, blah, blah, blah. It's a blanket statement. I wouldn't want to be the one testifying that I think
Nope.
that's adequate. I do
Agreed.
understand it's a safety net after the opportunity. So I would never replace that statement with the in-person signing off. I asked questions. I
Mm-hmm.
had the time. But
Right.
I think
I
a
do
lot,
think that the way it's being, reviewed or argued is an affirmative duty to offer it, to explicitly offer it, not just have the person, acknowledge that passively they had a chance on their
Right,
own to review it.
right,
So I think we
right.
do need to be documenting this explicit affirmative action taken by that building leader or department leader to offer it.
Correct. Correct. All right, moving along here, more BIPs. So again, who should have chance to review the BIPs? Who gets to access it? Again, just like the IEP, who needs to implement it across settings? So make sure the art teacher knows, the related service provider knows who has BIPs. And, if you're in the special ed world, you understand on the IEP where it checks, yes, the student has a BIP, and then you have to go find another document because the BIP is not always part of the IEP. It's a standalone document, so it can be manipulated without the CSE reconvening. So a BIP is a living document, unlike the IEP that gets closed and you have to reconvene if you're going to do any changes or review to it. So who gets to access that? How do they access that is really important. And then really, again, when you sit down to go over the IEP with staff, whatever your process is, if a student has a BIP, I reviewed that BIP with that staff member too. One, so they knew they had it, but also BIPs are pretty hard to write. BIPs are the writer knows what it means, but BIPs are really hard, I think, to implement in real time. So that's some time I would spend with other staff members about if the kid is doing this is your first line of defense, this is your second response, this is your third response. But I would put that in part of my IEP review. I just put this in, and this could be a 4-day conference, but MDR's manifestation determination review. So I'm not going to go into it in depth, but I wanted it on your radar, especially for building principals, that MDR reviews, manifestation determined reviews, may be required if the removal of a student with disabilities is due to behavior. And the IEP, if they find there's a connection, the IEP team needs to determine if the behavior was a result of the disability. The reason I put this in here is because, again, communication is essential between building administrators and CSE office. Students with disabilities cannot be suspended more than 10 days, not in a row, cumulatively, cannot be suspended more than 10 days without an MDR. Every incident after 10 days requires an MDR to be held. So principals who give 5 days in October and turn around in November, the kid gets 5 more days. And I'm like, oh, you should have done 2 days because now we're at 10. And now anytime you want to move that kid, we have to meet. And the kid cannot be suspended until you do that MDR. So that process is really important because I know buildings get really angst with me when I would say, that would put that kid at 11. You need to have an MDR before you suspend them. So Johnny goes back to class. The teachers are upset. The kids are upset. Parents are upset. The whole world is upset. But that's due process. So it's really important as a building administrator and discipline and CSE that you are talking to each other before you suspend kids, that you understand should CSE be reconvening and changing the BIP a little or putting in some more services before we suspend kids. Don't just go right to those suspensions and then call the CSE office and say, oh, Johnny's out 12 days and I'm going to a superintendent's hearing, because now the water is boiling.
Yeah, and I think where we're seeing some issues is I think that communication needs to be continuous too, right? It's not one communication early on in the process and then, a gap. I think that you need to maintain transparency between the building leader and the special ed department throughout the entire process.
Pick up the phone and call and say, how many more days do I have before Joyce can be suspended? Or what do I do next? Because she just blew up and I need to, deal with this situation. Because we have other suggestions besides just 5-day suspensions. So give us a chance as the CSE department, special ed department, to put some strategies or things in place so you're not burning your bridges so quickly.
Right.
So that's MDR. I said we could do this forever. I'm not going to do it forever, but I want that on your radar as you go into school. this year. The other thing I want you just to keep in mind is a behavior plan has to come from an FBA, a functional behavioral assessment. Again, as a building administrator, CSE chair, you should be reviewing those. The BIP is built off the FBA. And if you see a kid that continues to get suspended with a BIP and with an FBA, you're going to get yourself in the conversation is this is a pattern of behavior. Do we need a new FBA done so we can get a new baseline? Do we need to come up with another BIP? So just because an FBA was done in second grade and the kid's behavior hasn't changed, he's still cursing people out, throwing desks around, and you think the FBA behavior is still the behavior we're dealing with. Neurologically, the kid has developed. He's had different milestones and other, growth patterns. So do more FBAs than you probably think if you keep seeing kids being suspended. And if you keep suspending kids with behavioral plans, then something's not working. The behavioral plan isn't connected to the FBA correctly. So just reconvene CSE, document that you have met, document you have reviewed, do some updated evaluations, get yourself in a really good position if you need to change that kid's placement or you've suspended a kid that many times. So get yourself in a good spot when you're going to be doing that type of discipline. FBA, also you have to be implemented by trained staff. Again, who's training them, where you're documenting it. And then behavioral plans have to be continuously monitored and updated. There's BIP quarterly reports that have to go out, just like progress reports. Make sure that they're going out. And as an administrator, I would be reviewing them to see, are they working or not working? If you're looking at a behavioral plan and your data isn't good, then the behavioral plan needs to be revisited. So again, we could spend a million days on discipline. I didn't want to bog us down on it too much, but I want you to be cognizant of that as you're setting up your school year. All right, let's check the chat real quick. All right, let's see. Way past that one. Okay, let's get to the end here. We have a BIP goal on the IEP. Great idea. No, you still have to do BIP reports needs to still be sent home quarterly, even if you have a behavioral goal, which you probably should have if you have a kid with a BIP, because the behavioral goal should be the strategy you want to be teaching him, the replacement strategy. That's what the IEP goal should be. And your BIP reporting data is how many times have you used the interventions? What are they responding to positively? All of that data. It's different data. Let's see what else. Melissa, let's see, Joanne, let me get down to you. Some schools may change, yep, disciplinary change of placement, yep. And if a CSE MDR is now indicated or not, yep. And if you do, I used ClearTrack, but I'm sure IEP Direct has it too. I had my staff graph their behavioral data for their quarterly progress reports, and that was really helpful for parents to see it in a bar graph instead of a narrative. And then it kind of changed what it looked like too from the IEP. So that's a feature in your electronic IEPs if you have your behavioral plan information in there. Yes, you'll get a recording of this training, Krista. We'll also send our progress or the PowerPoint, and we'll also give you our contact information. Do I have a checklist that can help admin that says example, ensure progress reports be sent? I'm really good at making checklists. So depending what district you're in, I'm happy to help, and we can give more information on the end of that. All right, did I get everybody there, Brett, in that chat? Can you speak adequately, Sam? Very difficult. Yep, it is very difficult. There really isn't any wiggle room with this. That's why I'm telling you, think about it in July, how you're going to set this off for people to sign off on it. Whether it's substitutes, whether it's half-day comp, like whatever you need to do, it's a part of the regulation. It is very difficult. That's why I put it in here, because I want people to have that in their universe thinking in August, like, okay, when teachers come in to pick up, I don't know, whatever packet, is that when they can sit down? But it's a process that you need to be working on in your district, and different districts do it different ways. All right. If I'm going too fast or if you have questions, shout out. All right. And then this one I just added because, it's transportation season. Transportation on the IEP, again, is another thing that building administrators need to be aware of, because if students are suspended off the bus, which happens, and sometimes it's not the principal that does it, it's your director of transportation, and they call you. So you need to understand if there's special transportation on that IEP, suspending them off that bus and that student can't get to school could essentially be considered a suspension from school, because you are denying them a service to get the services. So just keep that in your brain. And it's not necessary to include special transportation goals on the IEP unless you have to have a strategy or skill that you're teaching that student in order to get that transportation. But again, Brett and I will pound it in, it's communication. Just like I want buildings to call central office CSE, I want the bus garage to be telling the principal if a kid's being suspended from the bus. I want the principal to say, well, that student has specialized transportation. It's not that easy. And then I want the CSE conversation to start. So again, it's that communication back and forth with each other. Because I used to tell my building principals, I know I sound like such a pain in the ass, but I'm really here to help you stay out of hot water and to help you navigate the system. And it's easier for me to do it before the incident than after the incident. So I know conversations are not always great when you have to call CSE and say, Johnny just did this and he needs to be off the bus. But we really are there to help say, okay, here's our options. This is what we need to do. Here's our due process procedures. So that's and again, if it's a BIP on the bus, again, they need training and opportunity also. There's also transportation training that has to occur in the summer. That's regulation, PJ's law, etc. for transportation. So this is a good time to talk about that with those when they're here for your bus. If you do your bus garage training like I used to do mine. So IEP and transportation, again, they have to be directly informed of the service. So again, they have to have that opportunity. But I think what's also really important for them for you to understand and for CSE directors to understand, you just can't put specialized transportation on an IEP. You have to put why the student needs it. Is it health? Is it student behavioral issues? Is it because they need specialized equipment or specialized training? That is outlined on the IEP. So as you're reviewing IEPs as a building administrator, go to that last part of transportation. It'll tell you why they're getting that information. And then make sure you're having that conversation with the transportation when you're sitting there saying, where's your bus routes? Who's on what bus? All of that. And then just food for thought, when do you include a transportation director in a CSE meeting? If you have a student who has continued suspensions from an IEP, I would be inviting that director to the CSE meeting if they continue to struggle on the bus. If you need specialized training or specialized equipment, I would have the transportation director at that CSE meeting. So just think, okay, do I need to have them there for some of this information? All right, this one. Am I speaking way too fast? Okay, implementation of services. And I wanted to put this out because this is another sticky wick and it's a logistic nightmare. And I understand it. I was in a building and in district, but I want you just to know it is a pothole that you can fall in, and I want you to try to avoid it if you can. So we know the IEP is created on a specific date. That's the implementation date, and the student services begin when the service outline starts on the IEP, and that can be different. Here's our problem. So if we have annual reviews and they start in March, and you say services this year is consultant services till the end of June, whatever the last day of school is, and then in September on the first day of school, they're going to be in high school, so now they get integrated or whatever. If it says on that first day of school on 9/7 or 9/8 that services start for that service, services have to start for that service. That's the date. So the issue is, and if you have services that don't change and you have that date from March to March, that first day of school, services have to be scheduled. Now, this is the issue I always ran into. My service providers, my specialized service providers, my speech, my OT, all of my counselors, they would say, we get the kids schedules, we make our groups, we do some screenings, and services may start 2 weeks after school. Well, if a parent disagrees with that, you could be in an impartial hearing that services didn't start on time. You could be doing comp services to make up for sessions that have been missed. So as quickly as possible, which isn't law. Law says has start day, it says it starts. So if it says speech starts on 9/7 and it's one time a week, maybe you need to bring speech people in during the summer to get those schedules in place. This can be quite a pitfall if you have a parent who is not loving the district at this time and services don't start when that date says it starts. So implementation services, you have to have them in place for that date. Not working on it, not give us a week to figure it out. Not, I got to check with, especially like traveling. I do another school district, so I'm working on their schedules. None of that is going to matter. IEP date refers to when the plan was created and agreed upon. Implementation date is when services begin. Look at your implementation dates. Chances are they say the first day of school. That's when services have to be ready to go. Under IDEA, a public agency must ensure a child's IEP is implemented as soon as possible following the IEP meeting. So that's that IEP date. When are you putting the date on the IEP after a CSE meeting? Are you giving yourself time to process an IEP? Or are you saying services start tomorrow? Know those dates, understand those dates, be mindful about them. Sometimes ClearTrack and IEP just populates it for you. You don't want to do that. You really want to understand what those dates are. And they must be in effect at the start of the school year, including related services for each child with disabilities. Delays in implementing it have serious academic, social, emotional consequences for students with disabilities and can trigger your due process rights for parents. So, food for thought, just make sure you understand, are there gaps in services when schools start? What about when students move in? And again, this goes back to your emergency placement procedures. But no delay of services is the goal. So I understand logistically, it's a nightmare. State Ed doesn't care about our logistics. They don't care about our problem. They care that you're following the law. And this one is a really easy one to say. It says IEP started on 9/7. The speech didn't start till 9/15. You're out of compliance. There's not a lot of defense to that. All right. Any questions about that one before I keep going? Anything in the chat I should check? Chatty check. All right. Okay. So next thing, administrative support and responsibilities for CSE and CPSE. Again, this is our communication back and forth between departments. So New York State emphasizes administrative support is critical to effective IEP implementation. So as a building administrator and as a district administrator, what are your responsibilities? You have to train. Each member has to have training and the skills and knowledge to meet the needs and prepare them. This is for independent adult life, New York State Education Department. So our whole goal with an IEP is to make sure kids get where they're supposed to get when they graduate and they can participate and be in their transition goals. So people really need to understand, even CPSE, what's the end goal here. People need to understand what's the diploma requirements at the end. There's not that I'm in elementary, I'm only worrying about third or fourth grade. Everybody needs to know the responsibilities and obligations of a student from CPSE all the way until they leave, which is age 21, 364 days. Plus 364 days. So it's really important that everybody has that training. And this is a really good time to do during your special ed PD. Building administrators, you need to make sure, and district administrators, that IEP meetings are scheduled within the timelines for the initials, reevals, and annuals. You've got to hold your meetings on time. There's very little excuse for being out of compliance with that timeline unless you have a mutually agreed upon form with the parent that's going to give you extend time for you. Unless you have that signed off, dates are dates, and missing them is not an option. Building principals, make sure you have scheduling for coverage for staff so they're participating in CSE meetings. Make sure everybody knows, timeliness, that CSE meetings, I used to run 10 meetings, 5 days a week. It's like a factory, making sure if somebody shows up 20 minutes late, a gen ed teacher comes in because it was scheduled on his prep. And that's another thing you need to look at when you're scheduling CSE meetings, who has prep at what period, because if they're working through their prep, they won't show up. And then I have to deal with the union and I may have to pay them to be there on prep because that's their time, not my time. But really what's the process? Who's scheduling meetings? Who's getting the coverage? Who's getting the subs? It's also your responsibility to make sure everybody has access to the resources. You have to provide the tools, the data, and the procedural guidance to your IEP teams. And then you have responsibility for implementation oversight. Who is monitoring that the CSE recommendations are carried out in the student's educational environment? That goes back to who's doing the scheduling, who's making sure kids are getting the accommodations and modifications that they have on their IEP, who is making sure that their assistive technology is up and running and plugged in and available and accessible to that student every day, who is responsible for that IEP implementation. Food for thought. Food for thought. Lastly, this is your little checklist, just of oversight. So administrative duties to special ed, you have to ensure the district meets federal and state obligations. That's FAPE. You got to make sure the student has a free, appropriate public education, but it's also your obligation to make sure that the student is being educated in the least restrictive environment. That is becoming a topic that is more and more spicy, as you have a principal who says, needs to be in self-contained, can't be here anymore. You need to find a program for him, her, whatever. You really need to advocate that you have documented and tried everything in the least restrictive environment appropriately, unless, of course, it's a safety concern, harmful to that student, or they can't make progress in the general ed. But documentation is required for all of that. So don't forget your responsibility to LRE. Referral and evaluation. A student suspected of having a disability must be referred in writing to the district CSE chair or building administrator. You can thank ChatGPT because now parents are very good at asking ChatGPT to write that letter for them that hits all the legal boxes that they need to say to you to trigger their rights. So they used to write it on a piece of paper or a cocktail napkin that says, I want Johnny tested, and it gave you a little time and a little wiggle room. But if you get a ChatGPT, letter, it pretty much moves the ball along because it does exactly what it's supposed to do. But you also have to make sure that you counsel as a building administrator, whoever's talking to parents, you have to get their consent to evaluate, and you have to ensure that they understand what general ed interventions were provided to that student, documented and provided back to them. And you also have to tell them what general ed interventions are available, because CSE can say, when they come, yep, they may have qualified, but you have not done any general ed interventions. So we are sending it back because we're not sure if the student is learning disabled in reading because he has a disability, or he had lack of instruction or lack of access to interventions. So make sure you understand that conversation. IEP implementation timely reviews is our responsibility. We have to ensure we're compliant and accountable. Implementation, documentation of corrective action. So if you have a CAP in your building or an improvement plan in your district that has to be done, and I have to turn into state ed the behavioral intervention plans daily, or the suspension information, or resource room lesson plans, or whatever state ed tells me my corrective action is, believe me, I'm picking up the phone and saying to the building principal, you have to give me that. I cannot go to 11 buildings and collect this stuff. It's your responsibility to get that. So if you are on a CAP or an improvement plan as a building administrator, make sure you're talking to your CSE department about what are my responsibilities, what documentation do you need, when do you need it, and how do I get it to you. Inclusion and service delivery, again, LRE, you have to make sure every student is educated to the maximum extent in general ed. So if kids are in self-contained classrooms, but they only need to be there for instruction, they should be in a regular homeroom. They should be eating lunch with a general ed class. They should have their lockers with other kids. You can't just keep secluding students if it's not outlined on their IEP. Service model, this has been a genre for all of us. I feel like we should have it ingrained by now. Special ed is a service, not a separate place. So unless I cannot address that goal in a general ed setting, or I cannot provide instruction in the general ed setting, I have to have the support in the general ed setting. And then it's also our responsibility for parent engagement. Parent have the right to meaningful participation in an IEP meeting and to receive copies of all the documents. Now, when I say they have the right for meaningful participation, you really want that partnership with parents. You really want to work with them and make them feel like what you are on the side of that student, and that you really have common goals for them. It's easier to work through some of these pitfalls, or if the district stepped out of line and did something incorrectly, it's easier to get the train back on the track if you have a working relationship with that family. So picking up that phone, especially the ones who are the hardest to talk to, more frequently than you want to do, I say is time well spent. Brett, anything to add about parent participation? All right, I threw in IESPs just so you know, if you're in a district that has non-public schools in your district, or you have homeschooled students, which is different than home tutored students, those students get IESPs. And IESPs are individualized educational support programs. In order for a kid that's homeschooled to have an IESP, they have to have filed their IHIP with your district. I just want you to have it on your radar that even though you don't see these kids, you still may have responsibilities for them in the special education world. So I can answer more questions for IESPs, but it's non-public schools, it's homeschool kids, it's a document, you have to meet on them annually, you have to treat them like any other IEP student in the processes of keeping that documentation. But I wanted to just keep it on your radar, because and depending if the non-public is in your district or not, there's different obligations for district of residence and district of location if you have a non-public school in your district. So if you want more information about that stuff, again, my QR will be at the end and we can talk about that. But I just wanted it on your head, because count them in your numbers, because they're your kids. All right, let's see. Any chat for you? Check, do you have a extremely information you have to leave? All right, well, Mary Lou, Mary Lords will send you more stuff. How does the procedural safeguard of 14 days for change in service work into that? Terrence, I don't know what you mean. If you want to unmute and ask me more.
Sorry,
Hello.
I'm with a wonderful young lady who's going to ask you.
Great, nice to see you, wonderful young lady.
So I was always told that when you come to committee, there's a procedural safeguard for families. That change goes into effect 14 days from the date of that meeting. Certain tweaks like a goal adjustment or something small, with family permission, or like a transportation accommodation for safety, we could override that with family permission. But anytime we were like doing a large change, that procedural safeguard of 14 days is in place for families to consider. Say they get home and they're reflecting on the meeting and they had further questions. So I guess
there's certainly that cushion. 14 days, I don't believe is necessarily in the regulation. It may be a really good best practice, but because some people wait for the board meeting to occur also. So like, when is the next board meeting? Because the board, sets aside resources and really approves the CSE minutes. But parents do have the right to receive the prior written notice after the CSE meeting, which says these are the options we discussed and rejected, and this is why we picked and chose. So I certainly would give a cushion time. 14 sounds reasonable to me. I don't know if it's in regulation, but I wouldn't do it like the next day immediately after, because parents do have the right to receive that PWN and that action that the board has approved the minutes before services start. So it's really that implementation day. So you'll have those 2 dates on the IEP when the IEP goes into effect, which is after the meeting, because that's when you're saying it, but your service won't go into effect. Your implementation date would be delayed. That makes sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. Nice meeting you, wonderful person. All right, let's see. All right, and then let me check my time. Okay. This has been a really interesting topic for me lately, about hiring our special ed staff, how we evaluate and how we mentor them. And the reason it's becoming to the forefront is because we know there's a shortage of staffing. We know special education teachers are hard to find, but we also know some of them, the majority that we're getting now, weren't special education teachers by passion, by heart in the beginning. Most of them are a general ed teacher, or they have a different certification, and then they went back to get their master's in special ed, and so they could get into a position. So I hear a lot that, well, they weren't a special ed teacher, they don't know, they take too much work, blah, 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 blah. So I really caution people that, yeah, we have a shortage of special ed staff. We have people who've got certified maybe for their master's or got 15 credits in special ed. It wasn't their passion. It wasn't what they thought they were going to end up doing. They may be wonderful at it eventually, but I think we have to be really mindful as administrators is how we're growing these people, because we don't have the capacity anymore to say they need to go on a tip. We're not going to give them tenure. We're going to give them a jewel. They're going to be gone because there's nobody to replace them. So I think it's really important for us to figure out when we hire people, what are we doing to support them? What are we doing? What PD opportunities are we giving staff? What opportunities are we giving our providers, our paraprofessionals? What training are we doing? How are we increasing the capacity for inclusiveness? Are we training everybody? Because now Pine, as Karen mentioned, I do some work with them. They're out of NYU. It's the Program for Inclusion for Neurodiverse Education. We know more and more students are neurodiverse. Everybody has different brain functions and strengths and talents and abilities. And we need to start hitting all of those students' needs and talents and strengths, not just students with IEPs. So understanding neurodiverse education and training everybody in those concepts is really important to get us all to the same benchmark. How are you implementing your UDL? How are you implementing assistive technology? This is just food for thought as you're, starting your positions or ending your positions, is how are we going to start building the capacity in our buildings for our special ed providers to stay in special ed? And like I said, I think this is becoming more and more important for us, especially because, we know that there's wait list at BOCES. We know that BOCES can't find staff, so they're closing programs and sending them back to your district. Now you're stuck with kids, not stuck. You have the pleasure of being with students who used to be in an ED self-contained program that no longer exists, and you have to provide that service in your building. So understanding what are we doing to fill in our special education gaps? How are we training everybody? Because we know special ed, there's not a unicorn in the building that needs to deliver services. Everybody needs to understand how to effectively provide specially designed instruction, how to collaborate, how to implement AI appropriately, how to use assistive technology appropriately. So looking at your professional development moving forward and how you're supporting your staff, your new staff, so they don't get burned out, so they don't feel like they don't have the skills and knowledge, so they feel like you're invested in them. In the long run, it's going to help you. Food for thought, just what positions do you have open in your building and what solutions are you working on? Are you consulting with people? Are you collaborating with districts to share staff? Are you using virtual support for some services? Just what gaps do you have? And, have that conversation BOCE wide. Go to your district CSE chairperson advisory meetings or to your chair and put it on the agenda. Find out what other people are doing in your region. You're not the only one with the problem. So really, let's try to communicate and collaborate together about finding solutions on filling the gaps that are in your region, because we know there's tons, and I think we need to get really creative with them. So when you're hiring new staff, things that I just want you to think about is what professional development are you providing to your new staff? But more importantly, what individual support are you giving your new staff? Are you giving them coaching through their CSE meetings and IEP draft writing? I used to have open hours for my new staff and they could just get on and say, I'm writing an IEP goal, or could you look at this PLEP? Does this look good? Or this is my data collection. And I'd sit at my desk from 5 to 7 and they would pop on and ask me questions, because I think in real time, it's really important that they can ask questions in real time. What orientation to service and staff are you giving in your district? What's your mentoring program look like, and who's mentoring your new staff? And what are you doing to mentor them so you're mentoring your new staff appropriately? And then, are you training everybody in the electronic IEP system? Do they know what they can do? Who's doing that training? Who can they ask questions? And then this one I think really should be in our forefront too. How are we evaluating our veteran staff? These staff that are used to getting 4s for years, and when you give them a 3, they have a little baby meltdown because they've always had 4s. I think you really need to have meaningful conversations about them, about when you go in and you're observing a teacher, have you read the IEPs of the students that are in that classroom? Because you should understand what services you should be going in and seeing if you're evaluating that teacher. Are you seeing IEP goals being addressed? Do you see assistive technology being implemented if that's what the student was supposed to be doing? If he's supposed to be having a communication device, does he have it? Are they using it? Do you see that BIP being implemented? Are you seeing the appropriate testing accommodations? That should be conversations you are having with evaluations for your special ed and your general ed staff. An IEP has to be implemented whether or not a service is being provided in that class or not. So if I have a communication device on my IEP, I get it across settings. So if I'm evaluating a paraprofessional out on recess and I know a kid is supposed to have a communication board and I'm not seeing it, I'm going to talk about that during that evaluation. So I think it's really important that you're pulling from those IEPs so you're giving really meaningful feedback about, I need to be seeing IEPs being implemented. So I need to understand what's on IEPs. So food for thought as administrative units, have you gotten the training you've needed for professional development so you know what different service models look like? Do you understand when you walk in a resource room what that should look like? Do you know the difference between consultant, direct, or indirect? So when you do a walkthrough, you can say, yes, I saw that, no, I didn't. Do you know the difference between integrated and consultant? Do you understand the requirements for each of those models? And can you give meaningful feedback that, yep, I saw you working in this resource room. This is what I saw specially designed instruction. I saw scaffolding being done. Have you gotten that training? If you haven't, you should be insisting on it from your CSE department. The CSE director or someone in that district or me, I'd love to come and I can do trainings to tell you what, because sometimes I don't like to hear it from you guys. Sometimes I need to hear it from me. It's easier for me to explain things to them. But I think that's really important that you understand what you're supposed to be saying, because you didn't have special ed training maybe. All right, and then again, communication between administrators, cross settings and documents, departments, just make sure that you're responsible for breaking down the silos, aligning the goals, and ensuring consistent, clear communication across your districts and buildings. Pick up the phone, build that relationship, see each other. As a special ed director, I used to meet once a month with my 11 principals or my 11 administrative teams, just to ask what's working, what's not working, what can I do better for you? Sometimes I'd have to miss it. Sometimes they'd have to miss it. Then we would do a quick, conference call or a quick check-in, just so we eyeballed each other and we could ask questions, and we built that team. Special ed practices, policies, issues, and regulations, they require a reliable multi-channel communication system. Emails, project management tools, make sure you understand where the suspensions are being put, where behavioral plans can be found, how do you document parent communication. Make sure, I want to look at when a parent calls me, I wanted to be able to get on ClearTrack and see in my principal notes that, yep, the principal talked to that mom on this day, and this day. So when I called that parent and she said, I haven't heard from that principal, all blah, blah, and this happened, and I'd say, well, that's funny, because the last time I checked, he spoke to you on this day, or this day. It closes the ranks. It makes you feel knowledgeable and confident when you talk to each other. And it just shows parents that you're professional, you're collaborative. Community agencies, same thing. Just make sure you understand where you're keeping each other's information. Do you have a special ed manual? Who gets it? What format's it in? Is there a different one for administrators, from faculty? Make sure that's all something that you understand and you know how to access. Brett, anything to add about communication?
No, it's just essential. It's usually where the problems occur that they come to me from a disciplinary or investigative perspective. Um, I mean, we all know this, but communication is key. Documentation is key. Um, it's very hard for a district to go after an administrator or and I'm taking this from a defensive perspective, but it's very difficult when communication has been thorough, frequent, and well documented. It's oftentimes where there are gaps in communication that an investigation is occurring. Right? Otherwise, it's pretty easy to turn over the emails, turn over the phone log, say no, here had 4 calls on this day. Twice emailed them within the last month. Followed up. So communication is really essential. Joyce, you had talked earlier about communication with parents and interaction in CSE meetings as well. It's something I always have to remind myself, and we talk about it here in the SAANYS Counsel office, is that even though we have maybe had the conversation, outside of special ed per se, but I may have had the same conversation 100 times in the last month with membership. For that member, that's the first time they're having the conversation with an attorney, right? And it kind of constantly having to remind ourselves of how we service that member and how we communicate. And it's coming up more and more where the quality of interaction is being called into question, right? And I recognize that we can all experience burnout, or when you have 100 CSE meetings, it can feel repetitive and redundant. But more and more, we're seeing less challenges as to whether or not the regs were perfectly followed. Instead, how are these families and these students being treated in these meetings? And I think it's because a lot of times risk management, is driven from relationship building, right? Joyce, I think you touched on this as well, that having a strong, positive relationship with a family where maybe further education can instruct that family in a way that, a due process complaint's not going to come, or, maybe, some more leeway is going to be granted, or an, IEE isn't necessarily required in that situation, but that is going to always be a lot more difficult of a conversation if you don't have the relationship with the family. For instance, I have a recent situation where an administrator's in pretty hot water because during these CSE meetings, it was clear they were distracted talking to colleagues, not necessarily paying attention, laughing, giggling about, when the conversation was very serious. Clearly, they were thinking about something else or dealing with another issue. But those, interactions are essential. So I would say that is something to really keep in mind, and try to keep those positive relationships with the families. Ultimately, it's going to manage risk probably better than any other solution you have.
And that's really good to have that chain of command too, because if they were upset with the principal, refer them to me and let me have a bite at the apple. So really, like, just having that chain of command that maybe the assistant principal they don't get along with because they get suspended all the time. Well, then the principal should have a different relationship with. Maybe I'm tired of meeting with the principal. Okay, so then it's the CSE chair. Okay, I'm tired of talking to them. So then it was me. So having that communication. So I knew what the assistant principal, dean, everybody said, So I could put out a fire, I could come at a different way, a different approach, but again, it's that communication and team building. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because we are getting short on time and you'll get the PowerPoint, but I just wanted, this is a little bit about your resource allocation, things that you should be thinking about. And again, if we do a series 2, I'll talk more about budgeting and things like that when we get closer to budget season. Brett talked a little bit about that. Here's some of the hot professional development topics as you're starting to plan your PDs for your conference days for the year. Inclusive education is something that if you haven't been presenting anything on it, you are behind the 8 ball and you should be. Again, PINE, if it's something you're interested, NYU's program for inclusive neurodivergent education is a good PD provider for that. If you haven't done any professional development for your staff, especially your special ed related services on IEP development, assistive technology, AI and special ed is huge. I know these are things Karen has also been, percolating with or has already presented stuff about. Collaboration across professionals, which again is communication and systems and building those. Co-teaching, if you haven't done co-teaching lately, it's a good time to revisit that. And then again, like when I said hiring these staff and teacher burnout, there's a lot of PD requests now for staff wellness and retention. How do we support staff? How do we keep staff? How do they feel valued? This is, we're in a pressure cooker in special ed right now. And it is a changing landscape. And I really want my staff to feel like they're supported, but not just supported because they show up, but supported because I gave them the tools and skills and knowledge to do the job well. They understand what their responsibilities are. They do their job, and there's a balance in how they feel about what they're doing and how I'm supporting them. So that's just topics as you start thinking about your conference days. And then we're going to end with 10 tips on how to support your staff in successful special ed programs. Of course, there's leadership and vision setting. You really should spend time with your building or your departments, having a clear vision and a mission for your special ed that aligns with your larger school system and IDA requirements. Have that talk, get that buy-in, bring your stakeholders in, talk to your community parents and partners, and really have a mission statement that's clear for your building or your district, that's collaborative and inclusive. Make sure everybody understands their policies and laws. I don't expect people to remember them. I expect people to ask questions when they don't know what they're doing. So it's either call your office, look at Part 200, whatever your chain is, call your district attorney or call SAANYS legal department. Don't make decisions when you don't know the answers. It's easier for us to navigate things before we do it than after. Implement proven instructional support strategies. Make sure as an administrator, you're critical, you're a voice about providing the appropriate resources, training, and you're a supportive climate for staff and for all students, neurodiverse and neurotypical. Organizational leadership capacity building, again, depending on your department or where your position is in the chain of command, make sure you're using systems change strategies to build capacity across all settings. Make sure you have appropriate training of staff, improve collaboration, ensure adequate staffing and supervision. Focus on student outcomes. This is really important. Shift from simply increasing inputs, like adding more people, everybody needs an aide, I need more stuff, I need a different room, I need a larger this, to really looking at what's going on in those spaces. What is your instruction and support looking like? Make sure there's effective general ed instruction. We all know good instruction is good for everybody. Rising water, raises all the boats. So what's the instructional practices that your district is doing? Stakeholder involvement, engagement. Make sure you're providing things for parents, parent trainings, career nights, college nights, open houses, things special ed department. We would just do, winter reading series on Sundays or Saturday mornings for parents, just giving them things that gets into the building and sees what's going on. And like Pine, if you're doing a program, make sure you're highlighting it so parents understand what services you're offering. Professional development and supervision, provide ongoing training for all your staff and supervise them effectively. Give them feedback that's meaningful, which means you need to understand it. So make sure you're getting the training you need to have in your district. You should be able to say what continuum of services you have in your district, no matter what position you're in. Data-driven decision-making, we've all been, beat to death by that, but it's still important, and it's still important to have it documented. Inclusive, accessible practices, more and more. Make sure that students have access to effective teachers, all the learning opportunities and accommodations. LRE, building that safe and accepting learning community for both families and students is very important. We want students to graduate and be members of our community that are contributing and collaborative. And we know there's no group homes anymore. There's no sheltered workshops. There's no places for kids to go after they graduate except out into our workforces with support or without support in our communities. So they should be accepted in our building communities and our learning communities. And then the last was that budgeting and resource allocations. Make sure you're making purposeful decisions of where you're putting things. And again, we can talk more about that when we get close to budgeting. All right, Fast and Furious, for more information, that's my QR code. There's Brett's information, always available at SAANYS. He always picks up the phone with a smile on his face. And thank you, of course, for participating today. We know it's in the middle of the summer. I really do not take it for granted that you spent time with us. We appreciate your time. We understand special ed is challenging and even under the best circumstances, but the best plan of action is staying current and willing to live and learn. And that's why Karen is really doing an amazing job keeping these PD opportunities for you, because special ed is rapidly moving and we need to just keep talking about it to navigate these new waters for us. So again, thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brett.
Thanks, Joyce. And one final, note, you all, to everyone is just really try to. We talked a lot about communication and transparency with staff and with families, but also with central office, right? I think a lot of times we're finding that the individuals on this call and in the departments are, likely the most educated in the area of the district, and that can be very tough, right? Because you can feel isolated. Being transparent and communicating, up the chain to central office and the superintendent about the developments that are happening or areas that need improvement, I think that is always going to be better than hiding behind the wall and just keeping it all to yourself. We recognize how difficult the jobs that you all have are. So strategizing, taking things slow, and getting to us and Joyce before an issue occurs, I think is the best advice. Thank you, Joyce, for all that you do for SAANYS, and you're always a great resource for me as well. So hopefully this was helpful. And thank you, Karen, for putting this on.